The horse his father loved most had turned savage after the funeral, sending 3 grown men to the hospital in 3 days. 8-year-old Lucas walked into the stall alone, knowing exactly what words to whisper. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The morning sun filtered through the gaps in the old wooden barn, casting golden stripes across the hay-covered floor, but there was nothing warm about what was happening inside. The massive black stallion named Thunder stood in the corner of his stall, muscles tensed beneath his gleaming coat, eyes wild with a fury that made even the most experienced ranch hands step back in fear. His hooves struck the ground in warning, and the chains that now bound him to the reinforced post rattled with each violent movement. This was not the horse that Martin Delgado had raised from a foal. This was something else entirely, a creature transformed by grief into a force that no one could control. 3 days had passed since Martin's funeral, and in that time, Thunder had attacked anyone who dared enter his stall. The veterinarian had needed stitches after attempting to sedate him. 2 farmhands had been kicked so hard they were still recovering in their beds. Even Carlos, Martin's brother who had worked alongside him for over 20 years, couldn't get within 10 feet of the animal without Thunder rearing up and striking out with deadly precision. The horse that had once been the pride of the Delgado Ranch, a symbol of everything Martin had built with his own hands, had become a danger to everyone around him. The Delgado Ranch sat in a quiet valley, surrounded by rolling hills that turned golden in the autumn months. Martin had inherited the land from his father, who had inherited it from his father before him. For 3 generations, the Delgados had raised horses here, breeding them with care and selling them to buyers who appreciated quality and temperament. But Thunder had never been for sale. Martin had been there the night Thunder was born during a terrible storm, hence the name. And from that moment, a bond had formed between man and horse that everyone on the ranch could see, but no one could quite explain. They moved together as if sharing the same thoughts. When Martin rode Thunder across the fields, it was like watching poetry in motion. 2 souls perfectly synchronized. But Martin was gone now, taken suddenly by a heart attack that no one had seen coming. He had been only 42 years old, strong as the horses he raised, or so everyone thought. He had collapsed in the very barn where Thunder now raged, and some said the horse had been the first to know something was wrong. The farmhands had found Thunder standing over Martin's body, nudging him with his muzzle, making sounds they had never heard a horse make before, sounds that seemed almost like weeping. When they had tried to move Martin, Thunder had fought them. It had taken 4 men to pull the stallion away so they could take Martin's body to the house. Since that day, Thunder had not been the same. The gentle giant who used to let children pet his nose at county fairs had become a beast of pure aggression. He refused food for the first 2 days. He kicked through the door of his original stall and had to be moved to a reinforced enclosure. The ranch hands spoke in hushed voices about what should be done, and the word that kept coming up made everyone uncomfortable. Some said the kindest thing would be to put Thunder down, that an animal this dangerous couldn't be allowed to continue. Others argued that it would be a betrayal of everything Martin had stood for, that Martin would have found a way to reach Thunder, to bring him back. In the main house, just 100 yards from the barn, Martin's widow, Elena, sat at the kitchen table with her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. Her dark hair was pulled back, and the circles under her eyes spoke of sleepless nights filled with tears and impossible decisions. Across from her sat Carlos, his weathered face lined with concern, and beside him was the local veterinarian, Dr. Mendez, who had just finished explaining their limited options. "The situation is getting worse, Elena," Carlos said, his voice heavy with reluctance. "Thunder broke another board in his stall this morning. He's going to hurt himself, or worse, he's going to hurt someone else, maybe someone who can't recover from it. We have to consider the possibility that he's too far gone." Elena shook her head slowly, her eyes fixed on a point somewhere beyond the window, somewhere in the direction of the barn. "Martin loved that horse more than anything except our son. I can't just give up on him. There has to be something we haven't tried." Dr. Mendez cleared his throat. "I've been a veterinarian for 30 years, and I've seen horses grieve before. But this is different. Thunder isn't just grieving, It's like he's protecting something or waiting for something. I've never seen behavior quite like this. The sedatives I would normally use aren't safe to administer because he won't let anyone close enough. Then what do we do? Elena asked, finally looking at them. What would Martin do? The question hung in the air, unanswerable. Martin would have known. Martin always knew what to do with horses. He had a gift, people said, an ability to communicate with them that went beyond training or technique. But Martin wasn't here, and his gift had died with him. None of them noticed the small figure standing in the doorway, listening to every word. 8-year-old Lucas Delgado had his father's dark eyes and his mother's quiet determination. He was small for his age, thin and often overlooked, the kind of child who observed more than he spoke. In his hand, he clutched a worn photograph, one he had taken from his father's workshop. It showed Martin and Thunder on the day they had won the regional championship 3 years ago, both of them looking at the camera as if they shared a secret that no one else would ever understand. Lucas had not cried at his father's funeral. Everyone had thought he was being brave, but the truth was more complicated than that. Lucas hadn't cried because he couldn't quite believe his father was gone. He kept expecting to see him walk through the door, to hear his voice calling from the barn, to feel his strong hand on his shoulder the way he always did when he was teaching Lucas something important. The absence felt wrong, like a puzzle with a missing piece, and Lucas had spent the last 3 days trying to figure out how to make the world make sense again. Now, listening to the adults talk about killing Thunder, something stirred inside him. A memory surfaced, something his father had told him once while they sat on the fence watching Thunder graze in the evening light. Lucas remembered that evening clearly, the way the setting sun had painted everything in shades of orange and gold, the way his father's voice had carried a weight that made young Lucas pay attention, even though he didn't fully understand the words at the time. They had been sitting on the wooden fence that bordered Thunder's favorite pasture, and Martin had been watching the stallion with an expression that Lucas now recognized as something close to reverence. "You know what makes Thunder special, son?" Martin had asked, not really expecting an answer. "It's not his speed, though he's fast. It's not his strength, though he's powerful. It's his heart. That horse feels everything deeper than any animal I've ever known. When he loves completely. When he trusts without reservation. But that kind of heart is also fragile in its own way. If Thunder ever lost someone he loved, I don't know what would happen to him. A heart that big can break just as big." Lucas hadn't understood then. He had been only 6 years old, more interested in the grasshopper he had caught than in his father's philosophical musings about horses. But now, standing in the doorway listening to the adults discuss Thunder's fate, the memory returned with startling clarity. His father had known. Somehow, his father had known that Thunder's love was so deep it could become dangerous if it was ever shattered. The boy slipped away from the doorway before anyone noticed him, moving through the house with the quiet steps of a child who had learned to navigate the world without drawing attention. He went to his room first, tucking the photograph into his pocket, and then he made his way to the back door. The adults were still talking, their voices rising and falling with the weight of impossible decisions, and no one saw Lucas cross the yard toward the barn. The closer he got, the more he could hear Thunder's distress. The horse was slamming against the walls of his stall, the sound of hooves against wood echoing across the empty yard like thunder before a storm. Lucas felt fear rise in his chest, a cold sensation that made his hands tremble, but he kept walking. He had to. Something was pulling him forward, a feeling he couldn't name but couldn't ignore. The barn door was heavy, but Lucas had opened it many times before. He pushed it just enough to slip inside, and immediately the smell of hay and horses surrounded him. It was a familiar smell, a comforting one that reminded him of countless hours spent here with his father, learning how to brush a horse's coat, how to check their hooves, how to speak to them in low, gentle tones. But today, the familiar space felt different. The air was charged with something electric, something that made the hair on Lucas's arms stand up. Thunder's stall was at the far end of the barn, isolated from the other horses who had been moved to a separate building for their safety. Lucas could see the chains that had been added to reinforce the restraints, could see the damaged wood where Thunder had kicked and bitten in his frenzy. As he approached, the stallion's head whipped around, and for a moment those wild eyes locked onto Lucas with an intensity that froze the boy in his tracks. The horse reared up, pulling against his chains, and let out a sound that was half scream and half warning. His hooves came down hard, and the ground seemed to shake with the impact. Any adult would have run. Any sensible person would have retreated and called for help. But Lucas stood his ground, not because he was brave, but because he could see something in Thunder's eyes that the adults had missed. Behind the fury, behind the wild aggression that had sent grown men running, Lucas could see pain. It was the same pain he felt every night when he lay in bed and remembered that his father would never tuck him in again. It was the same pain that sat in his chest like a stone, making it hard to breathe, hard to think, hard to do anything except exist in a world that suddenly felt empty and wrong. Thunder wasn't angry. Thunder was heartbroken. "Easy, boy," Lucas said, his voice small in the vast space of the barn but steady in a way that surprised even him. "It's okay. I know. I miss him too." Thunder's ears flicked forward at the sound of the boy's voice. The stallion was still tense, still dangerous, but something in his posture shifted almost imperceptibly. Lucas took another step forward, then another, moving slowly the way his father had taught him, never making sudden movements, never breaking eye contact. "They said you've been hurting people," Lucas continued, speaking as if the horse could understand every word. "But I don't think you mean to. I think you're just scared. I think you're waiting for him to come back, and you don't understand why he hasn't." His voice cracked on the last words, and for the first time since his father's death, Lucas felt tears prick at his eyes. "He doesn't come back, Thunder. I've been waiting too, but he doesn't come back." Thunder made a sound, low and mournful, different from the aggressive screams of before. His head lowered slightly and his nostrils flared as he caught Lucas's scent. The boy smelled like Martin, like the same soap and the same laundry detergent, like the same hay and earth that had clung to Martin's clothes after a day of working on the ranch. Lucas reached the edge of Thunder's stall and stopped. The chains rattled as Thunder shifted his weight, still uncertain, still ready to strike if threatened. But Lucas didn't feel like a threat. He felt like the only person who truly understood what Thunder was going through, because he was going through the same thing. "Dad told me about you," Lucas said softly, reaching into his pocket and pulling out the photograph. "He said you have the biggest heart of any horse he's ever known. He said that's why you're special, but it's also why you hurt so much right now." He held up the photograph so Thunder could see it, though he doubted the horse understood what he was looking at. "See? That's you and Dad. That was a good day, wasn't it? He was so proud of you." Thunder's eyes fixed on the photograph, or perhaps on Lucas's face, it was impossible to tell. The stallion's breathing had slowed, and the wild tension in his muscles seemed to ease just a fraction. Lucas felt something shift between them, a connection forming in the space where words failed and only emotion remained. "I'm going to come in there with you," Lucas announced, his voice trembling but determined. "And you're not going to hurt me, because we're the same, you and me. We both loved him more than anything, and now we both have to figure out how to live without him." Lucas's small hand reached for the latch of the stall door. His fingers were shaking, and somewhere in the back of his mind, a voice that sounded like every adult he had ever known was screaming at him to stop, to turn around, to get help. But there was another voice too, quieter but somehow stronger, and it sounded like his father. "Trust your instincts, son. Horses can feel what you're feeling. If you approach them with fear, they'll be afraid. If you approach them with love, they'll feel that too." Lucas chose love. He unlatched the door and pushed it open just enough to slip inside, then pulled it closed behind him. The stall suddenly felt much smaller, with Thunder's massive form filling most of the space. The stallion was enormous, standing over 16 hands high, his black coat gleaming even in the dim light of the barn. The chains that bound him to the post clinked as he shifted, his muscles rippling beneath his skin, and Lucas could see the whites of his eyes as the horse tried to make sense of this small human who had invaded his space. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Lucas stood with his back against the stall door, the photograph still clutched in his hand, his heart pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. Thunder watched him with an intensity that felt like being examined by something ancient and wise, something that could see past skin and bone into the very essence of who Lucas was. The boy held his breath, waiting for the explosion of violence that everyone had warned him about. But it didn't come. Instead, Thunder made that low, mournful sound again, a sound that seemed to come from somewhere deep in his chest, a sound that spoke of loneliness and confusion and a grief so profound it had no words. Lucas felt tears slide down his cheeks, hot and sudden, and he didn't try to stop them. "I know," he whispered. "I know, boy. It hurts so much, doesn't it? It hurts like there's a hole inside you where something important used to be, and no matter what you do, you can't fill it up again." Lucas took a small step forward, then another, moving slowly across the hay-covered floor. Thunder's ears swiveled to track his movement, but the horse didn't rear up, didn't strike out. He just watched, his dark eyes following the boy's progress with something that might have been curiosity or might have been recognition. "Dad used to tell me that you were born during a storm," Lucas continued, keeping his voice low and steady. "He said the lightning was so bright it lit up the whole barn, and the thunder was so loud it shook the walls. He said when you came out you weren't scared at all. You just stood up and looked around like you owned the place." He smiled at the memory, even though the smile hurt. "That's why he named you Thunder, because you were as powerful and as fearless as the storm itself." Lucas was close now, close enough that he could smell the horse's sweat, could see the individual hairs of his coat, could feel the heat radiating from his massive body. Thunder's breathing had changed, becoming slower, deeper, more controlled. The chains hung slack as the stallion stopped pulling against them, his attention focused entirely on the small boy before him. "But you're not fearless anymore, are you?" Lucas asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're scared because the one person who understood you is gone, and you don't know what to do. You don't know how to be Thunder without him." The boy reached out his hand, slowly, carefully, the way his father had taught him. He held it palm up, offering rather than demanding, and waited for Thunder to make the choice. Seconds stretched into what felt like hours. The barn was silent except for the sound of breathing, boy and horse, both waiting, both wondering. Then, slowly, almost hesitantly, Thunder lowered his great head. His muzzle, soft as velvet despite its size, touched Lucas's palm, and the boy felt a tremor run through the horse's body. It wasn't fear. It was something else, something like relief, like the first breath after being underwater too long. "There you go," Lucas breathed, tears flowing freely now. "There you go, boy. I've got you. We've got each other now." Thunder's head dropped lower, and suddenly Lucas found himself with his arms wrapped around the horse's neck, his face pressed into the warm, dark coat, his small body shaking with sobs he had been holding back for days. And Thunder stood perfectly still, allowing the embrace, his great head curling around to rest gently against Lucas's back, as if he were trying to return the hug in the only way he knew how. They stayed like that for a long time, boy and horse, grieving together in the quiet of the barn. Lucas cried for his father, for all the things they would never do together, for all the words he had never said, for the future that had been stolen from them. And somehow he knew that Thunder was crying too, in whatever way horses cry, mourning the man who had brought him into the world and loved him unconditionally for all the years of his life. When Lucas finally pulled back, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand, he noticed something had changed. The tension that had coiled through Thunder's body like a spring ready to snap had loosened. The horse still looked sad, his eyes still carrying that depth of sorrow that Lucas recognized so well. But the wild fury was gone. In its place was something gentler, something that looked almost like hope. "I'm going to take these chains off now," Lucas said, reaching for the restraints that bound Thunder to the post. "And you're going to be good, because I need you to be good. Because they want to put you down, Thunder. They think you're too dangerous to live. But I know that's not true. I know you were just hurting, just like me." The chains fell away one by one, clanking against the wooden floor of the stall. Thunder could have bolted then. He could have reared up and struck out. could have trampled Lucas beneath his hooves, could have done any of the terrible things that everyone feared, but he didn't. He simply stood there, free for the first time in days, and waited to see what Lucas would do next. The stall door opened, and Lucas stepped out into the main area of the barn. He didn't look back to see if Thunder was following. He didn't need to. He could hear the soft footfalls behind him, could feel the presence of the great horse at his shoulder. Together they walked toward the barn door, toward the light, toward whatever came next. The sunlight was blinding after the dim interior of the barn, and Lucas had to squint as he stepped outside. The yard stretched before him, familiar and unchanged, as if the world hadn't shifted on its axis in the past 3 days. The main house stood in the distance, its white walls glowing in the afternoon light, and somewhere beyond that, Lucas could hear the sounds of the other horses in the secondary stable, nickering to each other as they always did. Everything looked normal, but nothing would ever be normal again. Thunder emerged from the barn behind Lucas, his hooves crunching on the gravel path. The stallion paused at the threshold, lifting his head to take in the fresh air, his nostrils flaring as he processed the sense of the ranch he had known all his life. For a moment, he seemed uncertain, as if the brightness of the outside world was too much after the darkness of his grief-stricken confinement. But then Lucas reached back and placed his hand on Thunder's shoulder, and the horse settled, taking comfort from the touch. "Come on, boy," Lucas said softly. "Let's show them you're still in there. Let's show them you're not what they think you are." They had taken perhaps a dozen steps when the door of their main house flew open and Elena came running out, her face a mask of terror. She had looked out the kitchen window and seen her son, her only child, her last connection to the husband she had just buried, walking calmly beside the horse that had sent 3 grown men to the hospital. For a moment she couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything except run toward them with her heart in her throat. "Lucas, stop." Elena's voice came out as something between a scream and a whisper. "Don't move. Stay very still." Behind her, Carlos and Dr. Mendez emerged from the house, their faces reflecting the same horror that Elena felt. Lucas did stop, but not because he was afraid. He stopped because he wanted his mother to see, wanted her to understand what he had discovered in the darkness of that barn. He kept his hand on Thunder's shoulder, and the stallion stood beside him like a statue, calm and still, nothing like the raging beast that had terrorized the ranch for the past 3 days. "It's okay, Mom," Lucas called out, his voice carrying across the yard with a steadiness that seemed impossible for an 8-year-old boy. "Thunder isn't going to hurt anyone. He was just sad. He was just missing Dad, like we are." Elena stopped a few yards away, her chest heaving, her eyes darting between her son and the massive horse that could kill him with a single kick. She wanted to rush forward and grab Lucas, to pull him away from the danger, but something in her son's expression made her hesitate. There was a peace in his eyes that she hadn't seen since Martin's death, a calm certainty that reminded her so much of her husband that it made her heart ache. "Lucas, please," she begged, her voice breaking. "Please come to me. We can talk about Thunder later, but right now I need you to come to me." "Thunder won't hurt me, Mom," Lucas said with absolute conviction. "He knows I understand him. He knows I love Dad too. Watch." And before Elena could stop him, before anyone could react, Lucas turned and stood directly in front of Thunder, looking up at the massive stallion with complete trust. The horse lowered his head until his muzzle was level with Lucas's face. Their eyes met, dark brown looking into dark brown, and something passed between them that the watching adults couldn't comprehend. Then Thunder did something that made Elena's legs nearly give out beneath her. The stallion gently nudged Lucas's chest with his nose, a gesture of affection that Martin used to receive every morning when he came to the barn. It was Thunder's way of saying hello, his way of showing love, and he was offering it to Lucas now. "See?" Lucas said, reaching up to stroke Thunder's face. "He's still the same horse Dad raised. He just needed someone to remind him that he wasn't alone." Carlos was the first of the adults to move. He walked slowly across the yard, his boots crunching on the gravel, his eyes fixed on Thunder with a mixture of amazement and lingering caution. He had known this horse for 12 years, had watched Martin train him from a wild foal into the magnificent animal he had become, and he had thought he understood the bond between them. But what he was seeing now, this impossible connection between the grieving horse and the small boy, was something beyond his understanding. "How did you do this?" Carlos asked when he was close enough to speak it without shouting. "Lucas, how did you know it would work?" Lucas shrugged, a gesture so innocent and childlike that it seemed out of place given the magnitude of what he had just accomplished. "I didn't know," he admitted. "I just remembered what Dad used to say about Thunder. He said Thunder feels everything deeper than other horses, that his heart is bigger. I figured if that was true, then Thunder wasn't angry at us. He was just sad and scared and lonely. He needed someone who felt the same way." Elena had reached them by now, and she stood trembling beside Carlos, unable to take her eyes off the scene before her. Her son, her small, quiet, often overlooked son, had done what no one else could do. He had reached into the heart of a broken animal and found a way to bring him back. "Lucas," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "you could have been killed. You should have told us. You should have asked for help." Lucas looked at his mother with those old soul eyes that seemed to carry wisdom beyond his years. "Would you have let me try?" he asked simply. And Elena had no answer, because they both knew the truth. No one would have let an 8-year-old boy walk into a stall with a horse that had been deemed too dangerous to approach. No one would have believed that the solution to Thunder's madness was not sedatives or chains or a final merciful end, but simply love and understanding from someone who shared his grief. Dr. Mendez approached last, his medical bag clutched in his hand, prepared for an emergency that hadn't materialized. He examined Thunder from a safe distance at first, noting the relaxed posture, the calm breathing, the complete absence of the aggression that had defined the horse for the past 3 days. Then, carefully, he moved closer, watching for any sign of danger. Thunder's ears swiveled toward him, but showed no sign of hostility. Dr. Mendez had been a veterinarian in this valley for over 3 decades. He had seen animals do remarkable things, had witnessed bonds between humans and their pets that defied scientific explanation, and had learned long ago that the creatures in his care often understood more than people gave them credit for. But what he was witnessing now, standing in the dusty yard of the Delgado Ranch, was something he would remember for the rest of his life. The horse that had nearly killed him 3 days ago, the same animal he had been preparing to euthanize as a last resort, was now standing peacefully beside an 8-year-old boy as if nothing had ever been wrong. "This is remarkable," Dr. Mendez said, slowly reaching out to touch Thunder's neck. The stallion flinched slightly at the unfamiliar hand but didn't pull away, didn't strike out, didn't show any of the violent reactions that had become his default response to human contact. His vital signs appear normal. His breathing is calm. It's as if the past 3 days never happened. "It happened," Carlos said grimly. "I've got the bruises to prove it. But somehow this boy managed to do what none of us could." He looked at Lucas with an expression that mixed admiration with something like wonder. "Martin always said you had a gift with animals, Lucas. I thought he was just being a proud father, but maybe he saw something the rest of us missed." Lucas didn't respond to the compliment. He was too focused on Thunder, running his small hands along the horse's flank, checking for injuries the way his father had taught him. The stallion had lost weight in the past 3 days, his ribs more visible than they should have been, and there were scrapes and cuts on his legs from his violent struggles against the stall walls. But these were superficial wounds that would heal with time and care. The deeper wounds, the ones that couldn't be seen, would take longer. "He needs food," Lucas said matter-of-factly, "and water, and someone to brush him. Dad always said that brushing helps horses feel safe. It reminds them that someone cares about them." Elena watched her son with new eyes. Since Martin's death, she had been so consumed by her own grief that she hadn't noticed how Lucas was handling his. She had assumed that his silence was a form of denial, that his dry eyes at the funeral were a child's inability to process loss. But now she understood that Lucas had been processing everything in his own way, quietly observing, quietly remembering, quietly preparing himself for the moment when he could do something meaningful. "I'll get the brushes," Elena said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Carlos, can you bring some feed from the storage barn? And fresh water from the well?" The adults moved with a new sense of purpose, each of them grateful for something concrete to do after days of helpless anxiety. Lucas stayed with Thunder, speaking to him in low tones that no one else could hear, words meant only for the horse's ears. Whatever he was saying seemed to work, because Thunder's head hung low and relaxed, his tail swishing gently against his hindquarters, all signs of a horse at peace. As Carlos headed toward the storage barn, he passed the fence where several ranch hands had gathered, drawn by the commotion and unable to believe what they were seeing. These were men who had worked with horses their entire lives, men who had tried and failed to approach Thunder in the days since Martin's death, and they watched the scene in the yard with expressions of pure disbelief. "The boy just walked right in there," one of them said, shaking his head. "No fear at all, like he knew Thunder wouldn't hurt him." "He's Martin's son," another replied, as if that explained everything. And maybe it did. Maybe the connection between Lucas and Thunder was simply an extension of the connection that had existed between Martin and the horse, a bond passed down from father to son, like an inheritance no lawyer could document. When Elena returned with the grooming supplies, Lucas accepted them without a word and immediately set to work. He started with a soft brush, running it along Thunder's coat in long, gentle strokes, working through the tangles and removing the dust and sweat that had accumulated during the horse's confinement. Thunder stood perfectly still, occasionally turning his head to watch Lucas work, his dark eyes following the boy's movements with something that looked like gratitude. "Dad used to do this every morning," Lucas explained as he brushed, speaking to no one in particular but loud enough for the gathered adults to hear. He said it was their special time together. Before anyone else was awake, before the day got busy, it was just him and Thunder. He said that's when they did their best talking. Elena felt tears prick at her eyes. She remembered those mornings, remembered waking to find Martin's side of the bed empty, remembered watching from the bedroom window as her husband made his way to the barn in the pale dawn light. She had always thought of it as just another chore, another task in the endless list of responsibilities that came with running a ranch. She hadn't understood that it was something sacred, a ritual of connection that meant more to Martin than he had ever expressed in words. Lucas moved around Thunder's body with a confidence that belied his age, checking hooves, examining legs, running his hands over every inch of the horse to reassure him that he was safe. When he reached Thunder's face, he paused and looked directly into the stallion's eyes. For a long moment, boy and horse simply stared at each other, and those watching could have sworn some form of communication was passing between them, a language without words that transcended the barrier between species. "I'm going to take care of you now," Lucas said, his voice carrying clearly in the still afternoon air. "That's what Dad would want. He wouldn't want you to be sad forever, and he wouldn't want them to give up on you. So we're going to help each other, okay? I'll be there for you, and you'll be there for me, and together we'll figure out how to get through this." Thunder responded by pressing his forehead gently against Lucas's chest, a gesture of trust and acceptance that made several of the watching ranch hands turn away to hide their emotions. These were tough men, accustomed to the hard realities of rural life, but even they could recognize something beautiful and rare when they saw it. A connection had been forged in the darkness of grief, and what emerged was something that would change everyone who witnessed it. The days that followed the miraculous calming of Thunder marked the beginning of a new chapter in the life of the Delgado Ranch. Word spread quickly through the valley about what had happened, about the 8-year-old boy who had walked fearlessly into a stall with a horse that everyone had given up on, and about the bond that had formed between them in the shadow of shared grief. People came from neighboring ranches to see for themselves, half expecting to find an exaggerated tale, but what they witnessed was something even more remarkable than the stories suggested. Lucas and Thunder had become inseparable. Every morning, before the sun crested the hills that surrounded the valley, Lucas would slip out of the house and make his way to the barn. He would feed Thunder first, preparing his grain the exact way his father had taught him, measuring out the portions with careful precision. Then came the brushing, the same ritual his father had performed for 12 years, and during these quiet moments Lucas would talk to Thunder about everything and nothing, sharing his thoughts, his fears, his memories of the man they had both lost. The other horses on the ranch had been returned to the main stable, and life had resumed something approximating normalcy. Carlos had taken over the day-to-day operations, handling the business side of things that Martin had always managed, while Elena dealt with the mountain of paperwork that accompanied a sudden death. Insurance claims, legal documents, bank statements, all the tedious necessities that seemed so insignificant compared to the enormity of losing her husband. But through it all, she found comfort in watching Lucas with Thunder, finding in their bond a continuation of something precious that she had thought was lost forever. It was about 2 weeks after the incident in the barn that the first real test came. A buyer arrived at the ranch, a wealthy man from the city named Richard Harmon, who had been in negotiations with Martin before his death. Harmon bred racehorses, and he had heard about Thunder's bloodline, his speed, his power. He had come prepared to make an offer that would be difficult to refuse, especially for a family that was now facing an uncertain financial future without its primary breadwinner. Elena received him in the living room, offering coffee and polite conversation while her stomach churned with anxiety. She knew why he was here, she knew what he wanted, and she knew that the decision she faced would have consequences far beyond the financial. Mrs. Delgado, Harmon began, setting down his coffee cup with the practiced ease of a man accustomed to getting what he wanted. I was very sorry to hear about Martin. He was a good man, and his reputation in the horse breeding community was second to none. That's precisely why I'm here today. Thunder represents the culmination of years of careful breeding. His genetic potential is extraordinary. I'm prepared to offer you a significant sum for him, enough to secure this ranch's future for years to come. Elena listened politely, her hands folded in her lap, her face betraying none of the turmoil she felt inside. She had known this moment would come. The ranch was struggling. Martin's death had left them with debts she hadn't known about, and the operating costs continued whether they had income or not. Selling Thunder would solve many of their immediate problems. It was the practical choice, the sensible choice, the choice that any reasonable person would make. But then she thought of Lucas. She thought of the way her son had changed in the past 2 weeks, the light that had returned to his eyes, the purpose that had entered his step. Before Thunder, Lucas had been drifting, lost in a grief he couldn't express. Now he had something to live for, something to care for, something that connected him to his father in a way that nothing else could. "Mr. Harmon," Elena said carefully, "I appreciate your offer, and I understand the financial realities we're facing. But I need some time to consider this. Thunder isn't just a horse to us. He was my husband's closest companion, and now he's become something very important to my son." Harmon nodded, his expression understanding but his eyes calculating. "Of course, Mrs. Delgado, I wouldn't expect you to make such a decision hastily. But I should mention that my offer has a time limit. I have other options I'm considering, and I'll need an answer within the week." He paused, letting his words sink in. "I've also heard about what happened with the horse after your husband's death. The aggression, the attacks on your staff. You should know that I have the resources to handle a difficult animal. My trainers are the best in the business. They could work with Thunder, channel his energy into racing. It would be a good life for him." Elena felt a chill run down her spine at his words. She had heard stories about racing stables, about the pressure placed on horses to perform, about what happened to animals who didn't meet expectations. Martin had always refused to sell to racers, believing that horses deserved better than to be treated as commodities to be discarded when they were no longer useful. "I'll give you my answer by the end of the week," Elena said, rising to signal that the meeting was over. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Harmon." After the buyer left, Elena stood at the window, watching his expensive car drive away down the dirt road. Her reflection stared back at her, and she saw the exhaustion in her own eyes, the weight of responsibility that pressed down on her shoulders. What would Martin want her to do? He would want her to protect Thunder, she knew that. But he would also want her to protect their son, to ensure that Lucas had a future, that the ranch survived to be passed down another generation. She was still standing there when Lucas came in from the barn, his clothes dusty, his hair disheveled, but his face wearing an expression of contentment that she hadn't seen since before Martin's death. He stopped when he saw her at the window, his young mind instantly perceiving that something was wrong. "Mom?" Lucas asked, his voice carrying a note of concern that seemed too mature for his years. "What is it? What happened?" Elena turned to face her son, and in that moment, she made a decision. Whatever happened, whatever choices she had to make, she would not make them alone. Lucas had proven himself capable of more than anyone had expected. He deserved to be part of this conversation. "We need to talk," she said gently, "about Thunder, about our future, about some difficult decisions we might have to make." Lucas sat at the kitchen table across from his mother, his small hands wrapped around a glass of milk that he hadn't touched. The afternoon light streamed through the window, casting long shadows across the wooden surface, and dust motes floated in the air like tiny stars. Elena had explained everything: the financial situation, the buyer's offer, the deadline they faced. She had tried to be gentle, to cushion the blow, but Lucas was his father's son, and he appreciated honesty more than comfortable lies. "So he wants to take Thunder away," Lucas said, his voice flat. "He wants to make him into a racehorse." Elena nodded, her heart breaking at the pain she saw in her son's eyes. "Mr. Harmon has offered us a lot of money, Lucas. Enough to pay off the debts your father left behind, enough to keep the ranch running for years. I know it's not what we want, but sometimes we have to make choices that are hard." Lucas was quiet for a long moment, staring at his untouched milk as if it held the answers to questions he didn't know how to ask. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Dad never sold to racers. He said they treat horses like machines, not like living things. He said Thunder deserved better than that. I know, Lucas, your father had strong principles, and I loved him for that. But your father isn't here anymore, and I have to think about what's best for our family, for you." Elena reached across the table and took her son's hand. "If we don't find a way to pay these debts, we could lose the ranch entirely. We could lose everything your father worked for." The weight of her words settled over Lucas like a heavy blanket. He had known things were difficult since his father's death, had seen the worry lines on his mother's face, had heard the hushed conversations between her and Uncle Carlos late at night. But he hadn't understood the full extent of their situation until now. The ranch, the only home he had ever known, the place where his father had lived and worked and died, was in danger of being taken away. "But Thunder saved me," Lucas said, his voice cracking. "When Dad died, I felt like I was drowning, like nothing made sense anymore. Thunder was the only one who understood. If we sell him, if we send him away to people who don't care about him, it would be like losing Dad all over again." Elena felt tears spill down her cheeks. She had tried so hard to be strong for Lucas, to hold herself together while everything fell apart around them. But her son's words cut through every defense she had built, reaching the raw, wounded heart that she had been trying to protect. "I don't want to sell him, Lucas," she admitted, her voice breaking. "I don't want any of this. I want your father back. I want our life back. But wanting doesn't change reality. Sometimes we have to let go of the things we love to protect the things we need." Lucas pulled his hand away from his mother's and stood up from the table. His small frame seemed to grow in that moment, his shoulders squaring, his chin lifting with a determination that reminded Elena so much of Martin that it took her breath away. "Dad used to say that Thunder was worth more than money," Lucas said firmly. "He said Thunder's bloodline was special, that he could be the foundation of something great. What if we didn't sell Thunder? What if we used him to save the ranch ourselves?" Elena blinked, confused by her son's words. "What do you mean?" Lucas began to pace, his young mind working through the problem with an intensity that was almost frightening. Dad bred horses his whole life. He knew everything about bloodlines and genetics and what makes a champion. Thunder is the best horse he ever raised. Everyone knows that. So instead of selling Thunder to someone who's going to use him up and throw him away, what if we bred him ourselves? What if we used his foals to pay off the debts? It was an idea that Elena hadn't considered, partly because she didn't have her husband's expertise in horse breeding, and partly because she had been too overwhelmed to think beyond immediate solutions. But as Lucas spoke, she began to see the outline of a possibility, faint but real, like a distant light in the darkness. "Lucas," she said slowly, "breeding horses takes time. It takes knowledge and resources that we might not have. And there's no guarantee that Thunder's foals would be valuable enough to solve our problems." "But there's no guarantee they wouldn't be either," Lucas countered. "And at least if we try, Thunder stays here. At least we don't give up on everything Dad believed in." He stopped pacing and turned to face his mother, his dark eyes burning with conviction. "Dad always said that the Delgado Ranch stood for something. He said we bred horses the right way, with love and patience, not for profit but for pride. If we sell Thunder to a racer, we're saying that none of that matters. We're saying that money is more important than principles." Elena stared at her son, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time since Martin's death. This wasn't a child standing before her. This was a young man, shaped by grief and responsibility into something stronger than his years should have allowed. He had his father's passion, his father's stubbornness, and perhaps most importantly, his father's unwavering belief that doing the right thing mattered, even when it was hard. "Even if we wanted to try," she said carefully, "we'd need help. I don't know enough about breeding to do this on my own. Your Uncle Carlos knows the ranch operations, but he wasn't involved in the breeding side of things. Your father handled all of that himself." "Then we learn," Lucas said simply. "We ask questions. We read Dad's journals. He kept records of everything, right? Every breeding pair, every foal, every decision he made. It's all there in his study. We just have to be willing to do the work." Elena was silent for a long moment, turning her son's words over in her mind. It was a risk, a tremendous risk, and there was every chance it would fail. But as she looked at Lucas, at the hope shining in his eyes for the first time since his father's funeral, she knew that some risks were worth taking. "All right," she said finally, "we'll try. But we do this together, Lucas. You, me, and Uncle Carlos. And if it doesn't work, if we can't make it happen, we may still have to make difficult choices. Do you understand?" Lucas nodded solemnly. "I understand, Mom, but at least we'll know we tried." The study had been Martin's sanctuary, a small room at the back of the house where he kept his records, his books, and the accumulated wisdom of 3 generations of Delgado horse breeders. Elena had barely entered it since his death, finding the space too full of his presence, too haunted by memories she wasn't ready to face. But now, with Lucas by her side and Carlos standing in the doorway, she pushed open the door and stepped inside for the first time in weeks. The room smelled like leather and old paper, scents that Elena had always associated with her husband. His desk sat by the window, cluttered with notes and photographs, and the walls were lined with shelves containing journals, veterinary manuals, and breeding records dating back to when Martin's grandfather had first established the ranch. Dust motes swirled in the afternoon light, disturbed by their entrance, dancing like memories given physical form. "Dad spent so much time in here," Lucas said softly, running his fingers along the spines of the journals. He said this is where he did his thinking, where he figured out which horses should be paired together and what the foals might become. Carlos moved past them to the desk, his weathered hands picking up one of the notebooks that lay open on the surface. "This is his latest breeding journal," he said, flipping through the pages. He was meticulous about his records. Every detail, every observation, every plan he had for the future. He paused at a page near the end, his eyes scanning Martin's familiar handwriting. "Look at this. He had plans for Thunder. Big plans." Elena and Lucas gathered around as Carlos read aloud from the journal. "Thunder's bloodline represents the culmination of everything our family has worked toward. His sire was Champion's Pride, winner of 12 regional titles. His dam was Midnight Star, descended from the legendary Storm King line. The combination of speed, strength, and temperament in Thunder is rare, perhaps once in a generation. My goal is to establish Thunder as the foundation stallion for a new era of Delgado horses. If handled correctly, his offspring could carry our name for decades to come." Lucas felt tears prick at his eyes as he heard his father's words. Even in death, Martin was guiding them, showing them the path forward. He had believed in Thunder's potential, had seen something in the stallion that went beyond mere commercial value. And now it was up to them to fulfill that vision. "There's more," Carlos continued, turning the page. He had identified potential breeding partners, mares from other ranches that would complement Thunder's genetics. Some of these contacts might still be interested, especially if we explain the situation. Martin's reputation in the breeding community was solid. People trusted him. But do they trust us? Elena asked, giving voice to the doubt that had been gnawing at her since Lucas first proposed this plan. Martin was the expert. I'm just his widow, and Lucas is a child. Why would anyone want to do business with us? Because of Thunder, Lucas said with quiet certainty, and because of Dad's name. People will give us a chance if we show them we're serious. We just have to prove that the Delgado way didn't die with Dad. Over the following days, they threw themselves into the work. Carlos reached out to the contacts in Martin's journal, making calls and sending letters to breeders throughout the region. The responses were mixed at first, many expressing condolences but hesitant to commit to anything concrete. But a few showed genuine interest, particularly when Carlos mentioned Thunder's bloodline and Martin's detailed breeding plans. Meanwhile, Lucas spent every spare moment studying his father's journals, absorbing information about genetics, temperament, and the subtle art of matching horses for optimal offspring. It was knowledge that most people spent years acquiring, but Lucas approached it with a dedication that bordered on obsession. He understood, perhaps better than anyone, that this was about more than saving the ranch. It was about honoring his father's legacy and proving that Thunder's story wouldn't end in a racing stable far from home. Elena handled the business side, navigating the complex world of contracts and negotiations, with help from a lawyer in town who had been a friend of Martin's. She discovered reserves of strength she hadn't known she possessed, driven by the need to protect her son and fulfill the promise she had made to him in the kitchen that afternoon. The first real breakthrough came 3 weeks later when a breeder named Isabella Vega arrived at the ranch. She was a stern woman in her 60s, known throughout the region for her exceptional eye for horseflesh and her uncompromising standards. She had been one of the contacts in Martin's journal, and her response to Carlos's inquiry had been cautiously positive. I knew your husband, Mrs. Delgado, Isabella said as she walked toward the paddock where Thunder was grazing. He was one of the few breeders I respected. Most people in this business are only interested in quick profits, but Martin understood that true quality takes time and patience. Lucas stood beside his mother, watching anxiously as Isabella approached the fence. Thunder raised his head at the stranger's approach, his ears swiveling forward with interest. For a moment, Lucas feared that the old aggression might resurface, that Thunder would react to this unfamiliar presence with the violence that had marked the days after Martin's death. But Thunder simply watched, calm and curious, as Isabella studied him with an expert eye. She took in his conformation, his movement, the proud way he carried himself. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a note of genuine admiration. Martin wasn't exaggerating in his notes, she said. This is an exceptional animal. The structure, the proportions, the way he moves. You don't see this combination very often. She turned to face Elena and Lucas, her expression softening slightly. I have a mare, Celestine, who would be a perfect match for him. I've been looking for the right stallion for years, but I never found one that met my standards, until now. Lucas felt his heart leap with hope. Does that mean you want to breed with Thunder? Isabella nodded slowly. I want to propose a partnership, actually. You have Thunder, and you have Martin's knowledge preserved in those journals. I have resources, connections, and experience. Together, we could build something significant. She paused, her sharp eyes moving between Elena and Lucas. But I need to know that you're committed to doing this right. Martin's way, not the easy way. Can you promise me that? Elena looked at her son, seeing the determination burning in his young eyes. She reached out and took his hand, feeling the strength in his small fingers. We promise, she said firmly. The Delgado way is the only way we know. The partnership with Isabella Vega marked the beginning of a transformation that no one could have predicted. Within months, the Delgado Ranch had become the center of attention in the regional breeding community, and Thunder, the horse who had nearly been destroyed in his grief, was now the foundation of something extraordinary. Isabella brought not only her mare Celestine, but also her extensive network of contacts, her decades of experience, and a business acumen that complemented Elena's growing confidence in managing the ranch's affairs. The first foal was born on a spring morning almost a year after Martin's death. Lucas was the first to reach the birthing stall, having spent the night sleeping on a hay bale just outside, unwilling to miss the moment. When he saw the tiny creature struggling to its feet on wobbly legs, its coat a deep black that matched Thunder's perfectly, he felt tears stream down his face for the first time since his father's funeral. But these weren't tears of grief. They were tears of joy, of vindication, of hope fulfilled. They named the foal Promise because that's what he represented, a promise kept to a father who was no longer there to see his dreams come true. Thunder seemed to understand the significance of the moment. When Lucas brought him to see his offspring for the first time, the great stallion approached the stall with a gentleness that moved everyone who witnessed it. He lowered his massive head toward the foal, breathing softly, and Promise responded by nuzzling against his father's muzzle in a gesture that seemed to transcend instinct. "He knows," Lucas whispered to his mother, who stood beside him with her arm around his shoulders. "Thunder knows this is his baby. He knows he's a father now." Elena nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She thought of Martin, of how proud he would have been to see this moment. Somehow she felt his presence in the barn, in the golden morning light, in the miracle of new life taking its first steps into the world. News of Promise's birth spread quickly, and inquiries began pouring in from breeders who wanted to reserve future foals from Thunder's line. Isabella handled most of these negotiations, but she made sure to include Lucas in every decision, recognizing that the boy's connection to Thunder was an essential part of the ranch's identity. People came from distant counties to see the stallion who had captured the imagination of the breeding world, and they left telling stories about the young boy who had saved him from destruction with nothing but love and understanding. The following year brought 3 more foals, each one confirming what Martin had predicted in his journals. Thunder's offspring carried his best qualities, the speed, the strength, the noble temperament, while also inheriting the refined characteristics of their carefully selected mothers. Promise, now a yearling, was already showing signs of the exceptional horse he would become, moving with a grace and power that drew comparisons to his father. But success brought its own challenges. Richard Harmon, the buyer who had wanted to purchase Thunder for his racing stable, returned with a new offer, this time seeking to buy several of Thunder's foals. His proposal was generous, far exceeding what the ranch could earn through conventional sales, and Elena found herself facing a decision that tested everything she had come to believe over the past year. The meeting took place in the living room, just as before, but this time Lucas was present, sitting beside his mother, with a maturity that seemed to have aged him years beyond his calendar age. He listened silently as Harmon made his pitch, his face revealing nothing of the emotions churning beneath the surface. "I'm offering you a partnership," Harmon explained, his smooth voice filling the room. "I take the foals with racing potential, develop them at my facilities, and you receive a percentage of their winnings. It's a fair deal, Mrs. Delgado. Better than fair, considering the risks involved in horse racing." "And what happens to the horses that don't win?" Lucas asked, his voice cutting through Harmon's polished presentation. "What happens to them when they're not useful anymore?" Harmon's smile faltered slightly. "That's the nature of the business, son. Not every horse can be a champion. Some are retired, some are sold, some are rehomed. It's the reality of the industry." "It's not our reality," Lucas replied firmly. "My father believed that every horse deserves respect, whether they win races or not. Thunder wasn't valuable because he could run fast. He was valuable because of who he was, because of the bond we shared. Your business treats horses like products. We treat them like family." Harmon turned to Elena, clearly expecting her to override her son's objections. "Mrs. Delgado, surely you understand that sentiment doesn't pay bills. I'm offering you financial security. What's your son offering? Principles?" Elena looked at Lucas, then back at Harmon. She thought of all the nights she had lain awake worrying about money, all the sacrifices they had made to keep the ranch running, all the moments when selling out would have been so much easier than pushing forward. And she thought of Martin, of what he would say if he could see them now. "My son is offering something more valuable than money, Mr. Harmon," Elena said, her voice steady and strong. He's offering integrity. He's offering the Delgado name and everything it stands for. And that's not for sale. Not now, not ever. Harmon's expression hardened. You're making a mistake, Mrs. Delgado. The racing industry has long memories. If you refuse to work with us now, doors will close that you might want open later. Then we'll find different doors, Lucas said, standing up to signal that the meeting was over. The Delgado Ranch doesn't need your doors, Mr. Harmon. We're building our own path. After Harmon left, Elena turned to her son with a mixture of pride and concern. That was a lot of money to turn down, Lucas. Are you sure we made the right choice? Lucas walked to the window and looked out toward the barn where Thunder stood in his paddock, watching the house as if he knew what had just transpired inside. Dad used to say that the easy choice and the right choice are almost never the same thing, Lucas said quietly. He also said that integrity is the one thing you can never buy back once you sell it. He turned to face his mother with a smile that carried echoes of his father's spirit. We made the right choice, Mom, I know it. Elena crossed the room and pulled her son into a tight embrace. When did you become so wise? She asked, her voice thick with emotion. Lucas hugged her back, feeling for the first time in years that everything was going to be all right. I had a good teacher, he replied. 2 of them, actually. 1 human and 1 horse. 10 years passed like water flowing through the valley, carrying with it seasons of change, growth, and healing. The Delgado Ranch had transformed from a struggling farm on the brink of collapse into one of the most respected horse breeding operations in the entire region. The paddocks that had once held only a handful of animals now sheltered dozens of horses, each one carrying Thunder's legendary bloodline and the Delgado commitment to quality over quantity. Visitors came from across the country to see the horses, to learn about the breeding program, and inevitably to hear the story of the 8-year-old boy who had whispered to a broken horse and saved not just one life, but an entire legacy. Lucas was 18 now, tall and lean with his father's dark eyes and his mother's quiet strength. He had grown into a young man of uncommon grace, one who moved among horses with an ease that seemed almost supernatural to those who watched him. The bond he had forged with Thunder on that desperate day in the barn had never weakened. If anything, it had deepened over the years, becoming the foundation upon which Lucas built his understanding of all horses. People said he had a gift, the same gift they had once attributed to his father, but Lucas knew the truth. It wasn't magic. It was simply love, patience, and the willingness to listen when others would have given up. Thunder was old now, his once jet-black coat silvered with age, his movements slower than they had been in his prime. But he still carried himself with the dignity of a king, still commanded respect from every horse and human on the ranch. He had sired over 30 foals during his breeding years, each one a testament to Martin's vision and the family's determination to see it through. Some of those foals had gone on to win championships, though never in racing stables. The Delgados sold only to buyers who shared their values, people who would treat their horses with respect and care, people who understood that an animal's worth couldn't be measured in trophies alone. On this particular morning, a crisp autumn day that painted the valley in shades of gold and amber, Lucas walked to Thunder's paddock as he had done it every day for the past decade. The old stallion was waiting by the fence, his ears pricked forward at the familiar sound of Lucas's footsteps. Despite his age, despite the stiffness in his joints and the clouding in his eyes, Thunder still greeted Lucas with the same soft nicker that he had offered to Martin all those years ago. "Good morning, old friend," Lucas said, reaching over the fence to stroke Thunder's graying muzzle. "How are you feeling today?" Thunder responded by pressing his forehead against Lucas's chest, the same gesture of trust and affection that had marked their relationship since the beginning. They stood like that for a long moment, man and horse, breathing together in the morning stillness. Around them, the ranch was coming to life, workers beginning their daily routines, other horses calling out for their breakfast. But in this small space by the fence, time seemed to stand still. Elena watched from the porch of the house, a cup of coffee warming her hands, a gentle smile on her face. She had aged too, gray streaking her dark hair, lines of laughter and worry etched around her eyes, but she was happy. The despair that had threatened to consume her after Martin's death had long since faded, replaced by a quiet contentment that came from knowing she had honored her husband's memory in the best way possible, by raising their son to be a man Martin would have been proud of. Carlos joined her on the porch, moving with the careful slowness of a man who had spent too many years doing hard labor. He had stayed on at the ranch, of course, becoming more family than employee, a steady presence that had helped hold everything together during the difficult early years. Now semi-retired, he spent most of his time mentoring the younger workers and sharing stories about the old days with anyone who would listen. Isabella Vega had passed away 3 years ago, but her legacy lived on in the breeding program she had helped establish and in the knowledge she had passed to Lucas and Elena. Before her death, she had told them that the Delgado Ranch was the finest operation she had ever been associated with, and that Martin would have been proud of what they had accomplished. Those words had meant more to Elena than any award or recognition the ranch had received. Later that afternoon, Lucas brought Thunder out of his paddock for their daily walk, a ritual they had maintained even as Thunder's mobility declined. They moved slowly through the property, past the new breeding barn, past the training arena, past all the improvements that the years of success had made possible. Thunder knew every inch of this land, had watched it transform from a struggling farm to a thriving enterprise, and Lucas liked to think that the old horse understood his role in making it happen. When they reached the small hill overlooking the valley, Lucas stopped and turned to face Thunder. This was their special place, the spot where Lucas had scattered his father's ashes years ago, the spot where he came whenever he needed to feel close to the man who had shaped everything he had become. The view stretched for miles, encompassing the ranch and the surrounding countryside, and on clear days like this one, you could see all the way to the distant mountains. "Thank you," Lucas said softly, resting his hand on Thunder's neck. "For everything. For teaching me that love is stronger than fear. For showing me that grief doesn't have to be the end of the story. For being my friend when I needed one most." He paused, feeling the old horse's warmth beneath his palm, hearing the steady rhythm of his breathing. "Dad would be proud of us, Thunder. Both of us." Thunder turned his great head and looked at Lucas with those wise, ancient eyes, eyes that had seen so much joy and sorrow, so much loss and redemption. And in that look, Lucas saw everything he needed to see: acceptance, gratitude, and a love that transcended the boundaries between species. They had saved each other, boy and horse, all those years ago in a dark barn filled with grief. And together, they had built something beautiful from the ashes of loss. The sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. Lucas and Thunder stood together on the hilltop, silhouettes against the fading light, a man and his horse at the end of a long journey and the beginning of an eternal bond. Some stories don't end. They simply become part of something larger, woven into the fabric of a family's history, passed down through generations like precious heirlooms. This was one of those stories, a tale of grief transformed into grace, of whispered words that healed broken hearts, of love that conquered even death itself. If you enjoyed this story, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment below rating this story from 1 to 10, and tell us where in the world you're watching from. Stories like these remind us that the bonds we form with animals can change our lives in ways we never expected. Until next time, take care of yourselves and the creatures who share your journey.